All right, so today in geometry, we are doing lesson 5-2, which is the midpoint on a coordinate plane. So what we're going to do today is figure out what the midpoint formula is and use it to find the midpoint between 2 points on a coordinate plane. So make sure you have your book, something to write with, and your vocab sheet handy so you can put that midpoint formula on there so you won't forget it. So let's get started here. We are on page 56. And it says, in a previous activity, we defined midpoint as the point on a segment that divides it into two congruent parts, right? So what we're going to do is look at this graph here. And what I want you to do in the table below is to write the coordinates of each endpoint. Okay. You can use a ruler to help you, it says, but try to identify the midpoints of each line segment in this graph here. Okay, so I'm going to give you a second to do that. So go ahead and pause the video. Fill in this chart with the points for each endpoint, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H, and then see how you can figure out how to find the middle between those. Okay, filling it in, it should have looked something like this. Okay, so the midpoint for AB was at 2, 4, CD was at 8, 7, EF is at 5, 3, and GH is at 11, 2. Now, when we have nice vertical or horizontal lines, we could just always count, right? To find the midpoint or the middle. Okay, but it's a little trickier when we have these diagonal lines. Okay, but compare the x-coordinates of the endpoints of each segment and the x-coordinate of the midpoint. Okay, so if we look at the x-coordinates of our endpoints, compare that to the midpoint, what do you think is happening there? Same thing with the y. If we compare the y's, okay, and compare that to the midpoint y value, how do you think we can make a pattern? Okay, describe any pattern that we see. Okay. Well, if you look at it, the x-coordinate of the midpoint is the average of our x values, okay? So, for example, 5 plus 11, that's 16. So the average divided by 2, since we have 2 points, would be 8, okay? 7 plus 7 is 14. So if I average that by dividing by 2, I get 7, okay? So the x-coordinate and the y-coordinate are always the averages of our endpoints, and that's how we find a midpoint, okay? So I'm just going to jump to number 3 here. Part B is asking the same question we kind of just answered on the previous page, so we won't really go over that too much. But I'm just going to show you the midpoint formula. So it's this. So to find the midpoint of our x values, you take x1 plus x2 and you divide it by 2. You find the averages of your x's. Okay, similarly with the y value of the midpoint, you put y1 plus y2 divided by 2. That gives you your average of your y's, aka the midpoint. Okay, so we're going to try one together here, number 4. So use the formula to find the coordinates of the midpoint M of AC. Okay, so our points are 1, 4. I'm just going to rewrite these, I think. So we have 1, 4. And we have 11, 10. So this is our point. So this is A, C. Okay, kind of like this. So let's find the midpoint of this line. So I'm going to take my x values, x1 and x2, add them together, divide by 2. For my y value, my midpoint, I'm going to take my y values, 4 and 10, add them together, divide by 2. Okay, so let's see what we get here. So 1 plus 11, that's 12. Divided by 2 is 6, right? 4 plus 10 is 14. Divided by 2 is 7. So there is our midpoint M. Okay. So if we had our midpoint M here, so what does that conclude about AM and MC? So what do you know if we have a midpoint? What do we know about these two little segments here? Well, hopefully you said that they are congruent. Okay, if it's a midpoint, that means AM is congruent to MC. Okay, because it will divide it into 2 equal segments. All right, the next one I want to do with you is this number 7 here. Now, we did a problem like this similarly where we just use like a number line to count. So I'm going to show you how you can do it algebraically using this midpoint formula. So it gives us the midpoint M of ST is this coordinate at 3, 6. So I'm going to draw, we have a segment ST. And we have a midpoint at M. They're telling you the midpoint coordinate is 3, 6. Okay? And point S has the value of 1, 2. What is the coordinate of point T? So again, we've done this before just by kind of counting, but here's how you can do it algebraically using that midpoint formula. So remember, it's x1 plus x2 divided by 2, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. This equals our midpoint. So I'm just going to call it mx, my. Just to say that that's the midpoint of x, the midpoint of y. Okay, so if I substitute in what I know the x value of my midpoint is 3, and I know one of the x values. Okay, I just don't know what x2 is, for example. So to find the x value of t, I'm just going to substitute in what I know and solve for what I don't. So I know that x1 is 1 plus x2 divided by 2 has to equal the midpoint of m, or the x value, which is 3. So if I solve this really quick, I'd have to clear the fraction. So I'd multiply by both sides by 2. So that's equal to 6. So then if I subtract 1 on both sides, I get the 0.5. So there's my x value for t. Okay, so we did a little reverse action on this formula. All right, to find the y value for t, we're going to do the exact same thing, but we're going to plug in for our y equation. So I know the y value of my midpoint is at 6, and one of my y values is 2. So we kind of have like 2 plus y. We don't know what the other y is, divided by 2. So solve that for y really quick and tell me what you get. Okay, you should get that y is 10. You times by 2, that'd give me 12. Subtracting 2 would give me 10. So there is our point for t. It's at 5, 10. Now, before we kind of talked about how you could figure out the distance between the x values. So like this would be a distance of plus 2. So if I add 2 again to 3, I get 5, right? What's the distance between our y's? 2 to 6 would be a distance of 4. So if I add 4 again, it'd give me 10. Okay? Because remember, the midpoint means these are congruent. So their distances between them have to be the exact same. So you can do it by kind of counting, thinking about it logically, or now you can kind of do it thinking about it in terms of algebra using that midpoint formula. So I'm going to have you guys try some on the next page here. Okay, so on number 1, I gave you a graphical picture of a segment. So I didn't give you the ordered pairs. You have to find those on your own. But find the midpoint of that segment. See where it is. Okay, if you did it right, you should have got that it's at 1, 1.5. Okay, or 1, 3/2 if you had that. Okay, so let's see, 1, 1.5 looks about the midpoint. Okay, so that wasn't at a nice exact location on the coordinate plane, but we could still figure out the midpoint. All right, next one you guys are going to try is one where I give you one of the endpoints in the midpoint. Okay, so one endpoint is at -7, 10. The midpoint is at 4, 2. So solve this whatever way you want, but try to figure out how to find the other endpoint. Okay, so I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay, so if we have an endpoint at -7, 10 on a segment, we don't know the other endpoint, but we do know that the midpoint is at 4, 2. If you did everything correct, we should have got that the answer is 15, -6. Okay. All right, so that's everything really with midpoint formula, knowing how to find the midpoint. Okay. And it's not too tricky. You just have to, know how to use the formula and plug into it. So just make sure you have this formula written down somewhere in a safe spot. Okay. And then the other types of questions where we can apply the midpoint formula by solving for one of the endpoints. But that's basically it for this lesson. Okay. All right. So we'll see you for the That's actually the end of Unit 1, Part 1. So we are almost done with Unit 1, or halfway through.